Good morning, everybody. How are we doing this morning? All right. My name is John Geib. I'm a master gardener. I've been a master gardener for about 8 years now. Got my training over in Midland. Moved here a couple of years ago and have continued on with master gardeners. We are an organization that does a lot of volunteer work for extension to help give out information to concerning anything from landscaping to water conservation to programs like this where we can do some interesting agricultural type stuff. I have been a chicken owner for about 25 years or so, so I do have a lot of practical experience, which is what I'll be drawing on a lot for this presentation. But a lot of this is also based on A&M type research and information like that, so it is all science-based with just a tweak of okay, this may be the actual, but this works a little better if you're doing it in actual practice. First off, I have to start with a warning. Owning chickens is a compulsive disorder. You may hear, once you get into owning chickens, about chicken math. Chicken math is real. It is worse than calculus. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Okay, we're going to talk about requirements for owning chickens, including things like legal and that sort of stuff. What it's going to take to actually get your chickens, whether it's going to be baby chicks or full-grown chicks. The upkeep and maintenance that we're going to be having as an ongoing thing. And then we're going to talk a little bit about meat or egg birds. And this presentation is going to be strictly on eggs, but I will be having a second presentation immediately following. That's just kind of a brief explanation of what's the difference between the egg layers and the meat birds, which you're going to be doing just to harvest for food for the most part. There's nothing graphic in that section on it. There's just some discussions that, if you're going to be thinking about doing meat birds, it's kind of something that you might want to stick around for. First off, is it legal? Well, if you're in the county, no problems at all, unless you're in an HOA area. A lot of times HOAs restrict the ownership of chickens. In that case, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Only suggestion then, move or try and get on the board and get the rules changed for your HOA. But that's usually just not going to happen. If you're in the city, it's kind of an interesting thing. I've talked to the people in code compliance. I have got answers on both sides of the fence. I've got answers that says they have passed a regulation that states specifically you can have chickens. You go into it, and I've got other ones that says, no, you can't, because it's a farm animal, and you have to be on land designated as for your agricultural use. But I've looked in the regulations, and I cannot find anywhere where it specifically states you cannot have chickens. Okay? The only place where it talks about having chickens is in the land definition used, but that's all it says. This is the definition. But if you're worried about code compliance in the city, there's a couple of things you're going to have to worry about. First is noise, which means I would not advise roosters. You don't have to have roosters to get eggs, so don't worry about that. But roosters will crow sometimes at all 8 times of the night, but usually starting at about 5:30 in the morning, which usually can really annoy your neighbors. Smells is another big one. If you're in the city especially, you're going to be in a smaller area, so the chicken manure may build up in an area. Wet chicken manure stinks, plain and simple. Dry chicken manure doesn't, but wet does. So if you're keeping it dry or keeping it clean, it's not a problem. Pests, when you're feeding chickens, a lot of times you'll spill food. You have food sitting out there for them a lot of times, all the time. So you can get pests that will include rats, mice, and all the associated pests that will come along chasing the rats and the mice, like the snakes and that sort of stuff. So try and keep it clean as possible, but understand that you are going to have these issues. Disease. The big disease that you have with chickens when it comes to human interaction is avian influenza. It is, in theory, transmissible to humans, but it usually requires very close contact, as in like picking up and kissing your chickens, okay? Which if you're doing them as pets, a lot of people will do that. So yeah, you want to try and avoid that. The other problem that you have if you have avian influenza in your flock, especially if it's the highly pathogenic version like we had blow through the country this year, if you have a sudden death in your flock and you report that, they'll come in, test your flock, and if it's the HPIA, they will come in and cull your whole flock. There's no option on that. That's one of the reasons our turkey prices were so high this year. They had several of the larger flocks of turkeys up in the Midwest that got hit with avian influenza, and they culled, I think it was between 2 and 5 million turkeys. Because you'd get a flock of 100,000 turkeys, one would test positive, and they'd cull the whole flock. So it was not a good situation for the industry. Property values can be an issue. So I mean, if you're keeping it clean and nice and neat, it's not a big problem. But if it can be, a lot of people when they do things like chickens and other animals, they have a tendency to let it run down the property. So you might want to think about that. Now, eggs or meat? Well, technically, any chicken can be an egg or a meat bird, somewhat. We'll talk a little when we're talking meat birds later. But for the most part, any bird that lays an egg, you can become a meat bird later. A 5-year-old egg layer is called stew birds. Okay? After about 4 or 5 years, the chickens will stop laying a whole lot, and they start becoming not cost effective to own. And so a lot of people will either retire them and not retire them either to somebody that can raise them as a pet if they don't want to keep them, or they will harvest them out and have a stew bird. A 4 or 5-year-old chicken is rather tough. You're going to have to pressure cook that in like an Instapot or something like that. So now acquiring. There's a couple of ways to acquire. If you're looking for chicks, you can go through feed stores such as Jackson Brothers or Tractor Supply or any of the other feed stores in town. You can go through online hatcheries. There are quite a few online hatcheries. I've worked with many of them. In fact, I've got a list later on the resource page that you'll see towards the end of the presentation. These are the ones that I have personally worked with and have never had a problem with. So, but they work well for getting day-old chicks. Kind of the interesting thing about chickens, as the chicken hatches, the day of hatching or the evening of hatching, they'll absorb what's left of the yolk, which is their feed source during their incubation period. They'll hatch out, and that yolk will sustain that chick completely for anywhere between 40 and 60 hours. So no food, no water. It doesn't need anything in those time frames. This is how day-old chicks can survive getting shipped from places like Iowa down to here without any problems. So the other option you can get is you can get to grow them from seed, your own seeds if you want, from fertile eggs, or you can acquire them online, which will be kind of an interesting thing we'll discuss here in a minute. Now, if we're going to a feed store for chicks, do understand if you are getting chicks and you're wanting eggs, you're looking at between 4 and 6 months before you get your first egg. So it takes a while for them to raise up. And they're producing nothing except cute fuzzy memories for about the first 3 weeks, and then they're just feed hog until you can get an egg out of them. So, big pros, you walk into the store and you say, I want some of these, some of those, and you walk out of the store and you have your flock that's ready to start growing. That's also one of the big negatives also. Walking into a feed store during chick season, which is usually in the spring, and wanting chicks, it is not a good thing to do. Go back to that chicken disorder? Yeah. You walk in, you go, oh, they're so cute, I want some, and then you walk home with a box of chickens and go, I have no place to put them. If you're going to go look for chicks, make sure you have your infrastructure in place. Coops, waterers, feeds, everything ready to go before you go buy your chicks. The other big problem is limited selection. They usually bring in between 4 and 8 varieties of chickens when they come in. These are the ones that sell very well, the ones that a lot of people seem to like because they've got a lot of name recognition a lot of times to them. But they're Some of them are not the best in the world. They're very specialized birds at that point a lot of times, it seems like. So it's not quite as good for a lot of the backyard flocks, it seems. Online hatcheries, a little bit of a different problem. You're still getting the day-old chicks. The thing is that you have to wait for them. I could order chicks today. Well, if this was middle of summer, I could order chicks today. I wouldn't get the chicks until at least next week. They hatch once a week at the nurseries, and that way they usually, it's Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday is when all the hatcheries seem to hatch out their chicks. They ship that same day, and you'll get them the next day or the day after. So that's something that you need to think about. One of the big pros is selection. One of the ones that I've used before has been Murray McMurray. Last I checked, they had well over 100 different breeds that you could get for chickens. But they also have not only chickens, but they have turkeys, guinea fowl, ducks, geese, that sort of thing. So you get a much wider selection of stuff that you might want to get a hold of. A lot of those can be very fanciful, where they aren't really that good for egg laying or meat production, but they're just pretty birds. But then again, you can also get good selections of like their meat birds, which are very good at producing a lot of meat for you. So the one big problem with online nurseries that I've found is the stress that it causes on the chicks. You're talking about a very small, fluffy chick that needs very specialized conditions when it starts off. These chicks will then get shipped, usually through the air, overnight. Well, it's U.S. Express Mail, I think, USPS Express Mail. It's 1 or 2 day service to anywhere in the U.S. usually. But that's a pretty hard, stressful life to start way to start your life. A lot of times you will get some mortality in the chicks, even once you get them at home. That stress takes a couple days maybe to figure out, and you'll lose a couple of chicks. Or you'll get situations like what I had one year, which is part of you get to wait for them to come, which can be a good thing. I planned to have chicks on a set week. I'd ordered them in like January for an April delivery. Time came around, they shipped them. I walked up to the counter at the post office, and the guy set up the box and says, "You may want to open it now." And when he set it on the counter, there wasn't a single sound coming out of the box. I lost 27 chicks that day. So it was like 95 that week. For some reason, it just, typical Texas summer or fall or spring, it just had to have a spike of real hot temperatures, and it killed off all of the chicks. On the good side, I called, took the box home, took a couple pictures, disposed of the chicks properly, called the company up and said, "Hey, this was the problem." They said, "Okay, do you want a refund of your money or do you want a new batch of chicks?" And I said, "New batch of chicks." Next Tuesday, I had a new batch of chicks. All of them showed up, no problems. So it is something that does happen and you need to think about sometimes. Now, acquiring through social media and online. It's online. You have to think about that. There are lots of negatives that go along with shopping online, but there are some goods. If you're doing local type buyers around the area, there's a couple of Facebook groups that actually do specialize in doing poultry in the Abilene area, so it works well to do it. You can get some really good selections. I've seen some absolutely beautiful birds for sale on Facebook. On the other hand, I don't know for sure if that's what I'm actually getting. You don't know the conditions that bird was raised in. You don't know if it's got any diseases on it. You don't know anything about that bird's history until the day you go to pick it up. So that can be a big negative. The other thing is you may not know what you're actually getting. That may look like a Rhode Island red bird, either a chick or a bird. That's the nice thing about online. You can actually get laying hens, hens that are actually laying eggs at this time, straight off of online. But you don't know what that chicken really is. Is it actually a straight breed of, Rhode Island red, or is it a little bit of a barnyard mix? Do they keep their roosters separate from the hens all the time and only breed at certain times? Do they have multiple roosters that might be able to get into to mount the chickens? So, it's some of those things you try and get what you can, but it's, as always, it's buyer beware when you're going online. The nice thing about it also is no wait. You can usually post, I'm looking for this, and you might get 4 or 5 different people in town that have that bird that they're willing to sell you, either brand new bird, either chicks or laying hens. Growing your own for seed, this can be interesting. This is the only reason that you will ever need a rooster if you really want eggs. If you want fertilized eggs, that's the only purpose in life for the most part for a rooster. The other is protection, but that's a little iffy. Mostly mother hens will take care of protection as needed, but roosters can be a little helpful for protection. So, unless you keep your rooster separate from your hens, and only have and put the hens that you want bred in with the rooster, you really never know what you're going to get when it comes to the eggs. Usually it's going to be this rooster with, the whole flock or whatever. But if you have more than one rooster, even if they're the same breed, which one of those is the one that's going to get a hold of the hens and fertilize them. So it's kind of one of those things. You usually know what's going to be going on if you're careful, but if you're not real careful and you're kind of a little lax on it, you can get a little bit of variation there. You have to wait for them to come. It's a 21-day incubation for chicken eggs. So you have to sit there and go, okay, the chickens will lay eggs for a couple of days, especially if you've got several of them, you can bunch together. You can then either incubate them in a mechanical incubator. If you do get a mechanical incubator, I would recommend getting one that has a fan in it and an automatic egg turner. Those are very helpful. You don't have to have them, but it's very helpful to keep the conditions in the incubator at the right temperature and rotating the eggs as needed very nicely. So it's a very useful thing. The other option you have is if you have a hen what's called broody. Broody hens means they're ready to go hatch the eggs, so they'll go sit on a nest, and you can't get them off. They will stay there. They'll fight you to get off. You can't put your hand under them. They'll peck at you, bite at you, everything they can, because they're there to protect those eggs while they're incubating. But they will sit on the eggs and incubate the eggs out. And what's very, very nice about that is once those eggs hatch, that mother is extremely protective. I have seen a mother hen who was a smaller hen go against my African goose, who stands about this tall, and put that goose back in its place. So mother hens are not something to mess with. They will attack you if you get in and start messing with the chicks. I've had that before. And chicken claws are nasty. They can get some pretty good wounds. So it's something that it's nice to have because they will protect those chicks very well from just about anything. So that's always the nice thing to do. That way you don't have to worry about trying to raise the chick. Mother will take care of them, show them how to eat, feed, drink, everything, keep them warm, and you're done. So that's a nice thing. So, but it can be a little stressful. Our goose was laying on a bunch of eggs. A couple of goose eggs, a couple of duck eggs, a bunch of chicken eggs. Everything was all nice and fertile under her. Day 18, she got up and walked off the nest. I did not get a single egg. I grabbed all of those eggs when I could. I had another broody hen, stuck them all under the broody hen when I figured out that the goose had left. It was just enough time that the eggs had gotten cold, wiped out the entire batch. So that's the one bad part about having the chickens incubate the eggs. You never know if they're going to actually stay broody long enough. Okay, basic requirements for both chicks and full-grown chickens: food, water, shelter. Key thing on that for the chicks: warm and dry. Key thing for the adults: dry. Okay? Shelter must contain your chicks. Doesn't have to be anything special. I've seen it as much as just a piece of cardboard, duct taped together in the form of a circle. Key thing there: circle. If you have corners in your whatever you're containing them in, chicks will have a tendency to huddle together for warmth, and a lot of times they'll huddle together in a corner, and to the point where they can squish the ones in the corner to death. So round works well because there's no corners to push them into. They'll kind of flow as needed. Draft free, but you want to be able to have some good airflow around that, which is always a fun thing. Drafts will have a tendency to bring in cool breezes, which will end up killing your chicks a lot of times. They'll get colds and die. Chicks die for all sorts of reasons. It's fun dealing with them. But you still don't want to have anything that's going to be too airtight, because if anything that's sealed up tight has a tendency to accumulate odors, usually ammonia from the manure, which can cause respiratory problems for the chicks, which will cause them to get sick and die. So, see a pattern here on, chicks aren't real fun sometimes. Soft floor. When we're talking soft floor, usually a lot of people will do straw. I usually use pine shavings. You can get them by the big bales at any of the feed stores. Those I found work very well. The smaller flakes work better if you're doing the pine shavings. The big ones work if you're dealing with larger chicks, after a couple of weeks old. But when you're talking the small baby chicks, the finer stuff works a little bit better as a matting. When we're talking day old, we'll talk about the paper towels here in a second. Now we're talking chicks, like I said, specific temperature ranges. Chicks like it between 96 and 98 degrees on their first day, and it will slowly decrease over time. Once they have feathered out, the temperature can go down pretty quickly, but for that most part, that first few days has to be a nice hot temperature wherever they're staying. This is why they stay under the mother hens when they're doing that. Mother hen will keep them nice and warm, up underneath those feathers. Best way to do these are heat plates or heat lamps. Heat plates are newer. They've started coming out in the last few years. They are unbreakable effectively, so that they kind of act as a mother hen to them. It's basically a flat plate that has heating elements in them with legs, and you can adjust the height on those legs to slowly bring it up as the chicks grow. But it gets a nice dark area that's warm, so that's where the chicks like to go under to simulate the hen. The other option you have is a heat lamp. Heat lamps are great. Usually when I do a heat lamp, I'll have a long tub. I'll put the heat lamp in one spot close enough that it gets really hot right underneath, like 100 right underneath the light. But by the time it gets down to the other end of the pen, it may be 80 degrees. And as the chicks grow, they'll kind of adjust where they want to be. If they want to be right under the lamp, they will be. But as they progress and can handle cooler weather, they'll move themselves out and just kind of float around. So that gives them the opportunity to get as hot as they want or as cold as they want. Lets them decide, which is always a nice thing. The one big problem with heat lamps. We had a friend of ours who nearly lost their entire house to a heat lamp fire. Problem with heat lamps is they have a tendency to fall. When they fall and break, the light bulb breaks, and then you've got two electrical leads sitting in an area of dry, fluffy tinder. And it catches fire very quickly. You'll have barbecued birds and then maybe a barbecued house. So be very careful with that if you're dealing with the older heat lamps. A lot of the newer heat lamps will have cages around the front, so even if they do fall and break the light, it's not sitting there in the litter, so it's not as big of a fire hazard. The other problem with that, depending on how tight the cage is, the little baby chicks can come in underneath that heat lamp to try and see if they want to get the warmth, and then you've got live electrical leads for them to zap into. So heat lamps you have to be very careful of when you buy them. So food. When we're starting food for chicks, we're usually going to be putting them into a feeder situation. You'll usually have some sort of a container to hold the feed, and then you'll have a feeder with just open holes that allows the feed to come in and they can peck it out. This helps keep it from being spread too far around your area, so it's not that big of a deal. Now, when we're talking feed, we're talking at the beginning, 18 to 20% feed. we're usually going to be talking about crumbles. These crumbles are just kind of a processed feed that's been mixed together and then compressed out and then crumbled down into a size that the chicks can eat. It contains everything they need for food and nutrients. You can get it in organic if you wish, but it works well for allowing the chicks to eat and find a good source of food. With that, though, because of the way chicks and chickens eat, they don't have teeth, so they can't actually chew anything up. The gizzard is one of the internal organs that they have. It's basically a really big muscle. And what it does is they'll put what's called grit, which is fine chunks of gravel and sand. They'll swallow that, gets into that gizzard. As the food comes through, the gizzard will take the grit. That muscle will work together and just grind up the food into small enough particles that it can get digested. So that's how they do everything. Fresh, clean water is a requirement. Always make sure your chicks have water. Remember, we're talking little babies, so they don't have water for a short time. It can stress them out and kill them. So be very careful with that. Minimum square footage that you need for a chick is about a half a square foot per chick, which isn't, it's not that much, but, we're talking little baby chicks. That requirement will go up as the chick grows, but that's a good starting point to look at. So, on day one, if you're going to go get your chicks, first thing to do is make sure your setup is ready to go. You've got food in there, you've got water in there, you've got the heat lamp on, and that space is already warmed up. Okay, if you're getting mail order chicks, you're talking about chicks that are already stressed. You don't want to stress them anymore. Okay. My suggestion is to because the pine shavings is kind of an odd situation for them to look at, they still don't know anything yet at the day-old stage, put down some paper towels. Gives them a nice flat white surface that they can actually grip a hold of and not have any leg problems. A lot of people do newspaper. The problem with newspaper is it's very slick for the chicks. Their claws can't get a hold of it, and so you'll end up with what's called spraddle leg. They'll blow a leg out like this, and they won't be able to come back in. And so you'll end up having to cull that bird because it will not be able to be fixed after it's set for a day or two with that leg all bent out of shape. There are people that will try and save their birds. They'll use like rubber bands and stuff to bend the legs back in where it needs to go. And a lot of times that will work, but it's something that you have to think about as you're doing it. When you go to unpackage your chicks, you're talking a fluffy mass. They'll put 25 chicks in a spot about that big. It's mainly for heat, because you're trying to keep the chicks nice and warm as they're flying across country. So, they have minimum orders of 25 so that you can not have to worry about, getting those chicks too cold. They want to pack in all the chicks as tight as possible. But you can't count individual chicks when you're dealing with a mass of chicks. When they're in the big tub running around everywhere, it's very hard to count the chicks. So best bet to do is as you're getting them out, pick up each chick, count it, take the head. Usually what I'll do is I'll grab the body and I'll grab the hold of both sides of the head, dip the beak in the water source to let them know this is water. And then I'll set them over next to the feeder. Okay, which at that time, I'll have a little bit of feed scattered around that feeder so that they know this is where food is, this is where water is. After that, they can handle it. They'll just sit there and grow and know what to do. The scattering of feed is useful for them. That gets them used to it a little bit. Understand that feed comes from the ground. Once that first day is done, you're just going to have to basically keep an eye on them, make sure they're fed, make sure they're watered. The more you handle them at a very early age, the more friendly they will be longer term. So, if you want to have nice friendly chicks, try and go in and handle them 5, 6, 8 times a day. Just go in and try and get them so that they aren't scared of you. Got to remember, you're huge compared to them, so you're a predator. So you have to kind of get them to break that of them to understand that you're useful. You're a safe person. So you can slowly adjust your heat lamps up and the temperatures down, so that the temperatures go down. Talking about 2 degrees per week usually until they feather out, and then you can probably drop it about 5 degrees per week after that. Watch out for what's called pasty butt. You're talking cute, fluffy animals that are excreting things that are wet and sticky. So you have to be careful. It has a tendency to get stuck on that fluffiness and block everything up so that they can't go to the bathroom. So you'll have to go in, to kind of keep an eye on the birds. You usually cannot miss it because most of the chicks when they're young are yellow, and you'll get a nice big black spot on the butt, and you're going, yep, okay. Pick them up, take a wet paper towel, usually with warm water first. You don't want anything too cold. Press it on there. A lot of times if it's still not real hard, you can just kind of scrape it off without any problem. Sometimes just holding it on there will soften it up enough and you can get it off. If you can't get it off with just a wet paper towel, fingernail works great, but get ready for a chick to scream at you, because when you pull that off and it's nice and dry, you're pulling a little fluff off too. So it's like pulling hair out. It's not pleasant for the chick, but it's required. If you do not take care of pasty butt, you will lose the chick. So keep them fed and watered. Keep your shavings clean and dry. That's the key thing, clean and dry for chicks especially. Now, you can either go a couple of days and clean out all the shavings. But what I usually do is I'll come in, and if there's any spots that are really heavily manured, I'll put an inch or so of shavings over top of that and, cover it. And then at the end of the season that I'm running the chicks through, I'll clean out the tub all at once. All of those shavings can either go in the trash if you need, or if you have a garden and do composting, this is some of the best stuff in the world for composting. It makes wonderful, very nutrient-rich soil. If you're looking for how to compost, I think you guys videoed the compost lecture that I have, and it's on their webpage, the YouTube channel. Once we're getting older, we're talking about what I call the teenagers. Anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks up to about 10 weeks. By this point in time, the chicks have actually feathered out. In reality, you can stick them outside if it's reasonably warm weather all the time, and I'm talking late spring to early summer type weather. You don't want it to be getting into the 40s at night. That's going to be a little too cold for them, unless they've got a hen that's going to be protecting them. Still running that 16 to 18% feed. The big thing is that you can start running with what's called pellets. It's the same stuff as the crumbles. The only difference is the size and the shape of it. You'll find that if you do full-size birds with crumbles, they have a tendency to spill the crumbles everywhere, and you lose a lot of feed. The pellets are a little bit better for them. They can go ahead and grab each individual pellet and swallow it down, so it's not that big of a deal. So you don't lose nearly as much feed. They still need access to grit. Now, that's either grit sprinkled over their feed, or if they're outside, that's already taken care of by Mother Nature. Moving on to adulthood, anywhere from 10 weeks on. They're pretty much full grown by that point, and you're just sitting there waiting for them to start laying their eggs. And like I said, depending on the breed, anywhere from, I've seen 12 to 20 weeks. I mean, it can be a while for those chicks. Still running the 16 to 18% feed. You can be running the crumbles. You can be running the pellets. The other option you can start doing is full-size grains, which will work. You don't want to do scratch except as a treat. Scratch is basically Milo and corn, and it might have a few other things in it, but that's about all there is to it. There's minimal nutritional needs or food requirements in there, and then it's very high calorie, so it's kind of like eating donuts. It's great for them, they love it, but it's not necessarily the healthiest for them. So you're going to want to try and get some other mixes in there. If you want, you can feed your food scraps to your chickens. It's usually not a major problem. The one thing you want to avoid is any food that has high odor content to it, like onions. That can taint the flavor of your eggs a little bit. Usually don't want to try and give raw potatoes. It's not real healthy for them, from what I've seen. But otherwise, just about anything can go in there. Just remember, if you have, you're feeding them the scraps of your meal that you've eaten and have seasoned and everything like that, all that salt and stuff that you may have put on your food is going to the chickens, and they're a much smaller animal. So you might want to think about, not putting in heavily salted food for scraps into their pen for them to eat. They don't have a problem with hot peppers at all. The capsaicin oil that makes peppers hot does not affect chickens at all. They will eat whatever at that point. So, oyster shell is the best thing you can give to your layers. If you have roosters with your flock, and you're giving your flock a layer pellet, and the layer pellets usually have about a 5 or 6% calcium content, as opposed to a 1 or 2% that you would see in the normal pellets. That extra calcium in a rooster will cause kidney problems and will kill the rooster after a certain period of time. So that's usually not a good thing. So usually you're going to want to not get a layer pellet, but just a regular chicken feed, and then supplement with an oyster shell or a crushed eggshell to allow the hens to pick up the extra calcium that they need. They're dropping out an egg a day usually, and so that calcium for the shell needs to be replenished somehow. So when I'm saying crushed eggshells also, that is a key thing. You don't want to give them anything that looks like an egg or an eggshell, because they'll look at it and go, oh, look, I've got food source now, and they'll start eating their own eggs. So that's usually not a good thing. Shelters, there's all sorts of different shelters: cages, pens, tractors, coops, you name it. All of them are a little different, but all do the same basic function: keeping the birds dry, keeping the birds usually out of the wind is the big thing. During the Snowmageddon that we had a couple years ago, I did not lose a single bird just having them sit in the coop. It was dry, it was draft free, and they were able to survive. They don't need anything special really, no matter how cold it is. Okay? If you want to put a heat lamp in there with them, that's fine. Just remember, heat lamps have a tendency to crash, burn, and burn things to the ground. So be careful with heat lamps if you're going to put it in during. And I would not recommend a heat lamp unless you're talking temperatures in the teens or less. Anything 20 or above, they need absolutely nothing except being dry and out of the wind. Now, if we're talking cages, this is how they usually do it in commercial ventures, is they put the birds in cages. They're keeping them at 3 square feet per bird. Now, we're talking a bird that can be 3/4 of a square foot worth of actual space if it's laying there. So, you can it gets up and it can move about 2 feet in any direction. That's it. That's not a lot of space. But you can keep them in that small of a space. The only problem with that is you're going to have to work very hard to keep the cage clean. So changing out the litter or whatnot on a daily or every other day basis is what you're going to be needing to do. There's a gentleman over in North Carolina. His name's Justin Rhodes. He came up with the idea of what they call a chickshaw. Same basic principle as the old rickshaws that you see in movies and stuff. Big wheels in the back, couple of posts in the front for it to set level, and then a couple of big arms that come out the front so you can pick it up and move the chickshaw around. Chickens put out about half of their manure when they're roosting at night. And so you'll end up with a big spot of manure wherever it is. Now, if this is in a coop, you're going to have to clean that up. The idea behind this is you put the birds out on a field, and you can move this chickshaw around, and that manure load from that one overnight thing gets to be moved around, so it's not a huge amount at any one given time. So these do work pretty well. I've got one that it's actually a turkey shawl version of this. It doesn't have the sides. It's just got a lid and some roosts on it. But, these do work fairly well. I think for the cost of an email address for him to send you the newsletter, he'll send you the plans for free. So, and he's done some modifications to it, but they're pretty nice. Chicken tractors. These are kind of an interesting thing. It's basically the same thing as the chickshaw, except it doesn't have the big movable wheels. They're a little bit harder to move, but they aren't a big problem. As you can see on the one on the left, it's got wheels, so when you pick it up, you can kind of slide it forward a little easier. The one on the right is the one that I actually ran meat birds in this year. I've actually still got a half a dozen chickens in that one right now. As you can see, running through it over here, very heavily beaten up ground, but you can see it goes here to here, and then it comes back and right over to here. This was one day. I moved the chicken tractor the next day, and it moved on. Every day I moved that manure load around. This is actually over top of my septic system, and if anybody that has septics understands that is the one spot, no matter how dry it is outside, you're always mowing. I didn't mow that section of yard this year. The chickens took care of it completely for me. It was very nice. I didn't. All sorts of coops. Coops can be small, coops can be big. Key thing, like I said, dry, out of the wind. It's a good thing on a lot of these coops if you want to put in nest boxes, so that you can have all the chickens will go into the coop, into the nest boxes, lay their eggs in the nest boxes. That way you aren't trying to play Easter every day looking for eggs. I do that with my ducks, unfortunately. Ducks have a tendency to they don't lay in nests. They just kind of lay it wherever. But the chickens will always go back to the nest and lay in the boxes. If you're going to do a chicken coop, it's best to have some sort of a run. These can be attached to the chicken coop, as you see in these, where it's just right up next to it, just a small little place. Gets the chickens out in the sunlight, which is a good thing. It's healthy for them. Sunlight is extremely good at sterilizing things. So, remember that 3 square foot minimum for the cages that we were talking about. That still applies when we're talking with the coops. We want to keep a couple of square feet per bird. The run, you're going to probably want to get as much run space as you can get just for the birds. That way it lessens that manure load, and less you have to worry about trying to clean it up. Coops can be made from just about anything. Old playhouses. This one is done with a couple of 2x4s on the sides, and then a cattle panel or two across the top to give you that arch feeling, also to prevent big predators from getting in. My guess is that probably on the bottom 3 or 4 feet, they've also got chicken wire to help prevent smaller predators from coming in, like raccoons and skunks and that sort of stuff. Got a nice big door on it, so you can actually walk into it, which is always a good thing. That way you can get in, make sure you got your feed and your water in there, that sort of stuff. This one is almost effectively a chicken tractor at that point. You can actually probably grab that one and pull it, but it's going to be very heavy. You're probably going to need a small tractor or an ATV to hook up to that to pull it. Anybody have an old trampoline? Cage in the sides, and you now have a instant chicken run. And then you can get fancy. Make a nice little cottage for them. Castles. This is the one I always find funny. I look at this one and I go, yeah, that one was just built, decorated, got it all set up. They opened the doors and threw a chicken or two in there just for the picture. I'm looking at all the stuff on the walls and all that. I'm like, yeah, that's not going to work for a chicken coop. They'll destroy that. Now, the reason you have the coop of some sort is because of predators. Just about everything in this world loves chicken. anything from big stuff to small stuff. In city, we're talking, the dogs, the cats, the raccoons, the skunks. You will get snakes. Snakes mainly will be going after eggs and chicks. If the chickens are pecking at the snake in self-defense a lot of times will take out a chicken, but usually in the process it ends up getting killed in the process. So, but you can't really do anything with the snakes. The only way to get rid of the snakes is get rid of their food source. So that means keep your feed cleaned up nicely to keep the rats and stuff away. That will help keep the snakes out. Hawks, if you're out in the country especially, hawks can be a big problem. And you're free-ranging your birds like I do. They're running around in this big wide open field and hawks can come down and pick them up. One of the reasons I don't mess with my rabbits in my yard is because that gives the hawks a food source away from my chickens. So I don't have too much problem with hawks, luckily. We're starting to get out of town. Bobcats, although bobcats do roam in town a little bit. Mountain lions, if you're on the south side of town, down like 707 and 8384, they consistently see bobcat sightings down there, or mountain lion sightings. So it's something to take into effect. In town is going to be more of an issue for humans. You may want to somebody may want to come over and borrow a chicken from you. Out in the country, that's not as much of a problem. So the other one is chickens, believe it or not. If a chicken gets injured somehow, say runs into a fence line where it scratches it and it starts bleeding, the other chickens will go, "Oh, what's that? Peck. Oh, peck, peck, peck." Chickens are baby dinosaurs. They will tear each other up, literally, to the point where they will kill each other and then eat each other. So, there are a lot of times and if that happens, if you see it happening, take that chicken that's injured, pull it out, let it heal up, and then you can reintroduce it. It's not a big deal. But if it's injured, it's going to get pecked at by the other birds a lot of times. Free ranging. This is the best thing for your chickens. This is not free ranging like they talk about when they're selling you eggs. This is actual free ranging. I'll get to that in a minute. But this is a friend of mine's yard in Midland. She had about 30 chickens. It took her a while in Midland to get this type of little yard. Absolutely gorgeous, right? It's a little hard to see in here. This is a big old bunch of whole squash plants, whole bunch of bushes she's got. One day she went out to her chicken coop, fed the chickens or something, closed the door, left for a couple hours in town. Unfortunately, the door didn't latch properly. Chickens got out. Barren wasteland in about 4 hours. Chickens are some of the most destructive critters when it comes to landscaping. So if you're going to have flower beds or vegetable gardens, you must keep your chickens out of them. Okay, which means fencing, usually a couple of feet high. Okay, the vegetable garden, I actually have a 6-foot fence to keep the chickens out because that's how they can, if they really want to, they will try and fly and get up over there. So, best way to keep them contained is either with some sort of fencing. Now, you can get this poultry netting. You can get it both electrified and non-electrified. The electric will actually work pretty good at keeping away predators. If you have like a chickshaw or a tractor or something like that, that they're running in and that you might worry about their safety, get a chicken net like this, especially electric, and it'll help keep another layer of protection to keep the predators out. Even if it's not electric, it will keep the chickens in. They're usually about 3 feet tall. The big problem with these that you'll find, chickens do fly. Unless they're the big fat meat birds, pretty much any chicken can fly over one of these nets if they try. So what you'll have to do is what we call clipping a wing. You'll pull a wing out, spread the feathers out, and then just take a pair of scissors or sharp cutters for like plants, and just work your way along the edge of the wing, not touching any of the skin. You're only cutting the feathers off. So all of the flight feathers down their wing on one side. If you do both sides, they can kind of get enough lift off of both wings because they're symmetric that they'll actually be able to fly over this still. But if you do one, it throws them so off balance that they crash before they can get the 3 feet in height. Now, talking eggs. Really depends on the breed that you have, how many eggs you're going to get. Typical egg, a fancy egg layer may only give you 50 eggs a year. If we're talking some ducks, turkeys, that sort of stuff, a lot of times that's the sort of range you're looking at. If you're looking at some of the high production layers like the Leghorns, Rhode Island Reds, you're getting up to 300 eggs per year. The current world record, I think they just set a new world's record for the most eggs from a single chicken in a year, and it was 363 or 364. Okay. Now, the problem with doing that is you're pushing your birds beyond what they should be doing. Okay. Chickens will lay as long as there's enough light. That light amount is about 12 hours a day, which gives us about a 7-month window that they'll lay at full production rate here. Okay, so it's not too bad. And when they're laying during that time frame, you're talking an egg a day, maybe 5 eggs a week sometimes. So you're getting a lot of eggs during the summer. When it hits winter, a lot of times they'll go into either molt or just shut down for the winter in general, just to make sure that they're not, because they don't have the light source. Right now I'm getting, I've got 10 chickens. I got 2 eggs yesterday. But it's also at the very lowest light levels of the year for the next 6 weeks. So I'm not going to get many eggs for the next 6 weeks, but then they'll start laying again. They'll lay occasionally when there's not enough light. So if you want, you can add an extra light source to extend that daylight hour. Just a simple light bulb hanging in their coop is enough to qualify to give them that light cycle. It just forces them into it. The one thing I would recommend is not doing that, the light coming on at nighttime. Chickens will go to bed in their roosts normally. When it gets sunset, they all kind of flock in, hop up on the roost, they're good to go. If you have a light on set for nighttime, that light will be on, so they'll be in the coop, but then the light goes off and it's now pitch black in that coop, because it's well after dark. So then they're like, how do I get up on the roost? So the best thing is to let them go up to the roost normally at night. In the morning, kick the light on an hour or 2, 3 hours before sunrise, and that way they will they'll see the light. It triggers their response that they need to lay the extra eggs, but it's daytime coming out right off of that, so that it's not a problem with them having to try and get up on their roost in the dark. Now, one of the biggest things that you will see discussions about online, do I need to refrigerate my eggs or not? The USDA requires that if you are selling eggs, you will refrigerate your eggs. Part of that requirement is because the factory egg production facilities are filthy places. That's just how it is. You're talking lots of birds in very little space. Because of that, the eggs usually end up covered in manure. So the first thing they do after that egg's been laid, it hits the conveyor belt, slides down to the end of the egg-laying barn, and runs through a washing machine, basically, to wash that egg, to get it nice and clean so it can go out to market. Problem is, it washes off what's called the bloom that's on that egg. That egg is now a porous piece of calcium, and anything that's on the outside can get sucked in, including bacteria. To prevent any bacterial issues, that egg now has to be refrigerated. If you are a home flock and you do not wash your eggs, that bloom stays on your eggs and is an antimicrobial shield on that egg. For the most part, you don't have any issues, surviving with that egg not being washed and not refrigerated. I've had eggs on my counter before that have been 3 and 4 months old with no issues. Okay? If you refrigerate the egg, it does actually keep the eggs a little bit longer. Okay, so that's one thing. I usually refrigerate my eggs for a couple of reasons. One, my duck eggs I refrigerate because I have male ducks that run with the females. And so I have fertile duck eggs all the time. So if I refrigerate them as soon as I find the egg, I don't have to worry about that egg having developed at all. So it's still just a plain egg, and I don't get any nasty surprises. Because let me tell you, that's not a pleasant thing to crack open an egg and find something half developed in there. So, but if you don't have roosters, that's not a problem. Okay, so but like I said, I've had eggs up to 6 months in my refrigerator without any problems. And that's usually about what they'll say. That's probably about as far as you want to push it, 4 to 6 months. The eggs that you get in the store, just to let you know, are usually running about 6 weeks old before they hit the store. So, okay. Yeah, I've talked about the rooster. The only reason you need roosters is if you want fertile eggs. So, okay. Now, I was going to mention also before, but when you talked about free-range eggs and whatnot, the factory farms that we talk about for egg laying used to have them all in cages. That's how they did them, because they could stack 4 or 5 high, have an aisleway for people to walk through to check on the eggs, or check on the chickens, make sure you fed them, that sort of stuff. Then they started getting into this is inhumane, which it kind of is. So we'll do cage-free. Well, they took that same number of birds in that same, 2-acre size building that they were being raised in, took the cages out and just let them walk on the floor. Same number of chickens, same area, but they're now cage-free. There really isn't any difference between a cage-free egg and a regular egg. And it's for health reasons. Now, then they started going, well, everybody was like, no, my eggs are free range. They're out and about. They're eating like they're supposed to. So the industry went, okay, we'll put a little bitty door on the end of our building and have a caged area for the chickens to run at that's grassy, and they're now free range. So that's how there is no standards that says a chicken has to have so many square foot of range for them to eat or anything like that. They're still all raised in that same big barn. So this is why when you do eggs at home, they taste so much better, because they're getting a lot more different food and protein coming into their system, and it really does affect the flavor. Doesn't affect the nutritional benefits from what I've been able to find any information on, but it really does affect the flavor. I cannot stand store-bought eggs anymore. So it's ugh. So any questions so far? Okay, resources. Started off with the online hatcheries. Like I said, these are the ones that I have used regularly and have never had a problem with. This Murray McMurray is the one that seems to be one of the larger ones. They're up out of Iowa. They do have a reasonably decent selection of birds. The one thing I have noticed about any of the online hatcheries, yes, they have decent stock and good selection, but they aren't show quality birds. If you're looking for show quality birds, you're going to have to go look for a local source. You really are. The interesting thing I found, Hoover Hatchery is the same hatchery that provides the chicks to Tractor Supply Company. So if you can order literally from them or from Tractor Supply and get the same birds. If you're looking for information, especially good science-based information, Texas A&M University's Poultry Division has a very good website that has a lot of good information. On Facebook, this Abilene, Texas area poultry is one of the big ones in the area that has a lot of sales on birds and whether or not you can do it. Like I said, be very careful when you're doing it online, but you can still get some decent birds. This one is kind of a more interesting one. This was a YouTuber that I used to follow, or I still follow, Roots and Refuge Farm. She's got a lot of good information as a homesteader. She put together a Facebook group to get the homesteading community together so they could act as the brainstorm, because she was getting bombarded with so many questions when she hit 500,000 followers or whatever. She was getting bombarded with so many questions she couldn't answer them all. So she started this Facebook group so a lot of people that were in the homestaying community could answer each other's questions. Now, it's got about 45,000 people in that group. You'll get dozens of posts a day, people asking questions and stuff. Sometimes the answers can be a little off, from science, but it may work practically, but it's not quite the science that we need to think about. But a lot of times you'll get information, you can ask a question, and you'll at least get a point where you can start really looking into. Because if you've got, hey, my chicken's doing this weird thing, and you'll get a bunch of different posts back that it could be this, could be this, could be this, you'll go, okay, well, let me go check those on a site that I trust, like the A&M website, and go, okay, yeah, it's probably this is how I need to treat it. So it's at least a good source to start to get some information and narrow it down a lot of times. If you're looking for a book, if you really want to get into chicken raising, the Stories Guide to Chickens is, I would call it the Bible for chickens, raising chickens. Extremely good information, very science-based, very good information, and well-written. So, any questions on egg layers? No questions on eggs. Come on. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yeah. Apple cider vinegar in the water. I've never had a problem with it. I actually do use the apple cider vinegar in my water when I do my day-old chicks. Not so much for the probiotics, but a lot of times just to keep the water containers clean, because it raises the acidity level and knocks out the water hardness. But it does seem to help a little bit with the day-old chicks and helping alleviate the stress a little bit. But I don't have any scientific information specifically on that. That's the thing. That's why I can't recommend it specifically. Dust baths. Dust baths are very useful for birds. One of the chickens and poultry in general do not have any way to eliminate fleas or anything like that. So what they will do is they'll find some part of dirt. They'll dig into the dirt a little bit and get that dust and kind of fluff it up and get it up underneath all of their feathers. And that the sand and the dust is irritating enough, it will either kill the fleas or just drive the fleas off them. And so it's a way to prevent things. So if you have a dust bath, that's usually a good thing to have for your chickens. Like I said, if they're out in the grass, or in the yard, they'll find a dust bath somewhere to make. If you're going to leave them up in a tightened coop where they don't have a whole lot of run space, you probably do want to provide them with a dust bath of some sort. Diatomaceous earth works well for that also as a little bit. Just remember that as soon as diatomaceous earth gets wet or even moist, it's no longer effective. So if it's got to be in a very dry coop if you're going to be using DE. So, which just to let you know, I have done that before with my birds. I had a mite problem one time, and they were sitting in the nest box. I had a broody hen, and she was getting mites. I mean, to the point where I'd reach in for an egg, and I could feel the mites running up my arm. So I just took a handful of DE and just went poof right over top of her back. In 2 days, I didn't have any more mites. So it does work. Like I said, the key thing with snakes, food and shelter is what they're looking for. So if they have food, they will come. Especially if they have shelter. Now, rat snakes, bull snakes, hognose, bracers, any of those for the most part are the non-venomous snakes. I don't mind occasionally losing an egg or two to them because they keep the rats down. Okay, rattlesnakes, my wife hates them. I just kind of shoo them off to the side because they also keep my rabbit population somewhat under control. So it's kind of one of those debates on whether or not you can live with the snakes. The non-venomous snakes, for the most part, are not going to hurt you. Worst they're going to do is maybe bite you, but it's not. At that point, it's an infection issue, not a poison issue.
These are rattlesnakes.
Yeah. Rattlesnakes, you're going to want to try and keep them away, especially with the little one. Make sure your fence line is well taken care of. preferably with something that they won't be able to crawl through, like maybe some hardware cloth, the 1/4-inch hardware cloth, buried into the ground so that they can't get over to you. At least deters them a little bit. Do not bother buying any of that snake away or anything like that. It does not work. And mothballs are illegal to use to try and drive snakes away, just to let you know.
Would guineas help with that?
Guineas will help. Chickens, believe it or not, will help somewhat. Small snakes, chickens, guineas, that sort of stuff will eat them. Guineas will eat just about anything when it comes to snakes. The big problem with you'll run into with guineas is that you have, they're noisy for one, very noisy. And two, unless you've got 6 to 10, they have a tendency to run away. So it's just how they are. Any other questions before I move on to meat birds real quick? Okay. Okay. Now, like I said, this is meat birds. It's basically the same presentation that you've been given. The only difference I've got is a little further on. Okay. When we're talking meat birds, we are talking birds that are designed to put a lot of meat on their body before they get harvested. Okay? So we're going to be doing basically with a higher feed protein content on our feed from day one. These guys will grow at an absolutely astounding rate. You will be amazed. Once we've gotten past the chick stage, we're still running that 20 to 22% protein feed. Still going with the crumbles and pellets. This is the one where I would highly recommend pellets because the crumbles, they will just scatter everywhere. They're horrid for that. Water is also a big issue. I did not realize just how much water a meat bird will drink. When I made this presentation, that's what my meat birds were running, about 1/3 of a gallon to a 1/2 gallon a day. This was in the late fall, and then we hit that week where it was 95 degrees. My meat birds were drinking nearly a gallon of water per day. Now, I had 33 meat birds. So I was out there. I had a 5-gallon bucket that was their waterer. I had a dripper in there dropping 1 gallon per hour into the thing. I'd go out twice a day and make sure I had to top it off to make sure they had enough water. So they can drink a huge amount of water. Here's the key thing. 4 to 8 weeks was a teenager stage. 8 weeks and above, there is no issue. At 8 weeks, they will be harvested. The standard Cornish cross cannot live much past 8 weeks. Okay? They grow so fast that their internal organs cannot keep up with them. That thunderstorm that we had back in early October that came through, dumped about 2 inches of rain in the middle of the night. That thunderstorm was so loud and so scary, I lost 3 of my meat chickens to heart attacks that night because they were at about 7 weeks old. Okay? So their hearts cannot stand much beyond the 8 weeks. That's why you harvest them at that point in time. Just to give you an idea how much feed you're going to need, each bird's going to take between 25 and 28 pounds to grow to a full-grown range. So if you want to order all of your feed ahead of time, that's what you can kind of calculate off of. For every 4 to 4.5 pounds of feed that you put into a bird, you will get a pound of chicken out of it, which is kind of impressive. Now, the other one is the line at the end. You'll be feeding these birds 3/4 of a pound per day. I was going through a 50-pound bag of chicken feed per day for that final week for 33 birds. So that's, you sit there and you're like, I'm not feeding them much. I'm not feeding them much. Holy cow, they're eating a lot. Those last couple of weeks are scary. Shelter's the same, however you want to run them. Like I said, I ran my meat birds in my tractor. It wasn't a problem. The ones in the fall, I actually ran out in my backyard just for a little bit. There are no processing facilities nearby. So you cannot take a load of chickens to a processing plant and says, please, send me back nice frozen birds. So you're going to have to do it yourself. So it's not hard, but you are taking the life of that bird. So, but you have to remember that that bird, that's what its purpose was. It was to feed you. So this is why we do it. The videos that I have listed there, which are in your handouts, I would highly recommend those. These are the videos that taught me how to process birds. If you're looking for turkeys, because a lot of people are starting to go over to turkey, raising their own turkeys, the last two are pretty good for how to process turkeys. Turkeys are actually the one I would, if you're going to start processing with birds, I would do a turkey first. Turkey is basically a very large chicken. Okay, so when you're going in to harvest and to clean out the insides and stuff of all the innards, it's a much easier thing to do because you're talking a bird this big where you can get your hand up in there and learn what everything feels like. So it's not that big of a problem. Chickens, you're very tight cavities a lot of times. If you're going to be processing them, here's all the equipment that you need or could need. Okay, the big key here is the plucker. First couple times we did chickens, there was my plucker right over there. This last time I was doing 33 birds. I'm like, no, I am not hand plucking 33 birds. There's no way I can handle that. So the PVC cutters is the other one that is kind of an optional. It's very handy, but not really required. That's usually for cutting off the heads and the necks. Okay, here's my setup. I've got two what we call kill cones. Now I went and I bought the nice metal ones because I do enough processing that it makes it fairly easy. The reason to do the kill cones like this, it contains the bird much easier. We take it from the kill cone, we switch over to the a scald. This is water sitting between 150 and 160 degrees. I usually shoot for the middle, right at 155 if at all possible. All it is a big crawfish stew pot sitting on top of an outdoor burner. That's all it takes. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. You'll take that. I've got a nice big leather glove that comes up to the shoulder or the elbow. I'll take the chicken by the feet, dunk it in. You're going to have a little soap in that water to break the surface tension, to get that water up, that hot water up next to the skin. You'll dunk it in, and you're trying to get that skin to loosen up just enough that those feathers will release. Okay? Once the feathers release, they're easy to pluck. So about 10 or 12 seconds in the water, I'll pull it out, check some of the wing feathers because those are some of the hardest to pull, as along with the tail. The breast usually is not an issue. Those almost kind of slough off by this point. But if those feathers are pretty hard to tug on still, back in for another 3 or 4 seconds, check another feather. If they're good, I'll move on to the plucker. That's the plucker that I'm currently using. These are available at Tractor Supply and other stores like that. Hand plucking usually ran between 20 and 25 minutes. And got a well-cleaned bird. It's about 45 seconds in the plucker. So that's why I bought the plucker. Basically, imagine a washing machine tub with a bunch of rubber fingers around it. Has a plate at the bottom with rubber fingers that spins. And it's got water jets at the top where you plug a hose into and it sprays the water to keep everything at least somewhat lubricated and washes the feathers out through the bottom. So these things work amazingly well. I've seen those that you can hook up to like drills and stuff like that. I've never been impressed with those from the looks of them. They just don't seem to work very well. Now, usually the pluckers, while they work really well, because you are trying to get areas that sometimes may not be easily accessible, you'll still end up with a little bit. So usually what it'll do is I'll come straight off the plucker onto the table and finish plucking off anything that needs to be done. That's also why I have the needle nose pliers. Occasionally you'll get a feather that'll break right near the skin level and you can't get a good hold on it. So the needle nose pliers, easy to grab and pull those little feathers out. There we go. Come on. There we go. Selection of knives, one for butchering, usually one for the processing itself. There's not much problem with that. And then, like I said, the PVC cutters, which is what those are, I've got a set now that I just use strictly for the processing. Takes off the head, takes off the neck. Got a bucket here for processing for all the innards that we aren't saving. Also for the feet, also for the head. The wife likes to do stocks, so we do the neck, heart, the liver, and the gizzard. All go separate for the wife to process while I'm taking care of the rest of the chicken. That's her doing her processing of the gizzards and stuff.
What's your hot water tank for?
That was just our old hot water tank that we had to get rid of, and it's sitting in the...
Okay.
Yeah, so. When you get done, that's what your mini turkeys will look like. That is a 7.5 pound chicken. It is huge. I'm talking good size. Once we get into a rhythm, we're down to about 18, between 15 and 18 minutes from the time I hit the neck to the time it's going into the ice bath. It can be longer. Like I said, if you're hand plucking, it's going to take 30 minutes just to hand pluck. Okay? But you're trying to get this done as quickly as possible into that ice bath to help prevent any bacterial problems. One thing I did forget to mention, I do keep a water hose right there. This is for washing off the tables, any of the blood and stuff that may come out. You are working with a chicken. You usually have pulled the feed away from the chickens at least 12 hours ahead of time, if not 24. So that way there's very little left in the innards anyhow to have problems squirting out at you. But occasionally you will get manure, and you just have to make sure you wash that off and keep the tables clean. So once we're done with the process, notice, we've tucked the wings under. We've done a little cut of the skin right here, and we've tucked the feet in. These work great. If there was a vacuum-sealed bag that you could actually put these in, it would be great. But for the most part, I have yet to find one because these things get so big. You can't fit them in any of the small, heat shrink or vacuum seal type bags. So you have to use just a simple twist tie bag, which isn't as good as it could be, but you do what you can. But once they go in, you go into an ice bath. We usually leave them in the ice bath overnight. That gives it a little bit of a chance for the moist water to come in. Now, I've used that hose to pressure wash the inside of the cavity for the bird to get any of the excess that I couldn't get out, to wash that out. But when it sits overnight in this ice and water bath, any of those little solids that may not have been washed out easily will get flushed out, get dissolved into the water, and then they can just, float away. It's not a big problem. But once they go from here, they get dried off, weighed, put in a bag, put in the freezer. Yeah, and when I'm talking the meat birds like this, I'm usually talking the Cornish cross. That's what the high definition, these are designed for meat. But like I said, any chicken is technically a meat bird at some point. Because at some point it's just a pet because it's not giving you eggs. So it's either a pet or it's going to become meat. So your choice at that point.
Do you have a favorite breed?
I like the Buff Orpingtons. They're gentle. They're big, so they do lay good size eggs. They're pretty productive. They're 250 eggs a year, roughly. So I've been very, very fond of the Orpingtons. I love the Golden Lace Wyandottes, but they give small eggs. They're beautiful birds, but they give small eggs. Just to let you know that when I put up the chicken this year, it's for me and my wife, those 33 meat birds gave me 262 pounds of chicken. So,
You need a very big freezer.
yes, you need, at that point, you need at least probably 2 small freezers, if not a full stand-up, for that much meat. So, now if you break them down as opposed to having a chicken like that, but actually break it down so that you've got breasts and legs, leg quarters, and that sort of stuff. That when you break them down, you can stack them a whole lot tighter. Okay. Just to let you know, when I did the breasts off of these, because I had 6 that I didn't have freezer space for. I was running out of freezer space. And so the last 6 that we broke down, the breasts were so big on this that I literally took the breast, cut it in half because it was pushing 2 inches thick on the breast meat, cut that in half, and I came across with a single breast about that big from the cut, and then the other half of the breast I cut down. So each chicken gave me 6 breast patties that were good-sized breast patties. Because each side was 3 breasts effectively. And this goes against industry practice. If you're going to be going for meat chickens especially, I would suggest starting in the fall. And the reason is a couple-fold. You start in the spring, the weather's real weird a lot of times in the spring, so you never know if it's going to be hot or cold, and so temperature control can be an issue. Also, getting your chicks in can be part of the issue, like I explained earlier. But then at the end, when you're going to process, we're talking 8 weeks. Well, it depends on when you start. This year it was in the 90s and hundreds in late April. So, I mean, by the time, I would have had to have started my chicks in February to get them out at a time when I'm out processing that it's not 100 degrees outside. I ran into that with my meat birds in the spring. I was having to do a couple a day because it was so hot by the time noon hit. So I do those in the fall. Just remember, they'll be fully feathered by the time they're about 4 or 5 weeks old. So if a cold snap hits, it's not going to be a major issue for them. Okay? Plus, it's going to be much cooler weather to try and process, which is a whole lot nicer. Until it gets too cold and you're blasting cold water and getting, cold winds on you. So, one thing, when you are harvesting them out and you're trying to get the intestines out, the gallbladder can be an issue sometimes. It has a tendency to pop if you aren't. This is why getting in there for the turkey is a little easier sometimes. Learning how to get all that cleaned up so when you do pull, you don't break the gallbladder. From what I've read and everything I've seen, the gallbladder is not technically poisonous, but it does seriously taint the meat flavor to the point where you aren't going to want to eat it. So if I've had a couple that I've popped that, there was a spot on the bird that got a little bit of the bile on it, and I just carved that off, and then it's good to go. But there's been a couple of them where I popped it right in the middle of it, and it just made a mess. The bird went in the trash because I wasn't even going to try and fight with that at that point. Unfortunately, that is one of the things. So be real careful with the gallbladder. It can be nasty, hard to try and get out. Okay. So, any other questions? All right. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you.